And yeah, we are recording. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Urban Platform. Today, Aaron and I have a very special guest, Eric Piessel. Sir, am I pronouncing that right? Piessel?
Piessel.
Piessel.
Yeah.
Thank you. A Concordia alumni who majored in urban studies and currently working at Williams Sale Partnership, aka WSP. Eric, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. Pleasure to be here with you.
Awesome. Aaron, you doing good?
I'm doing good. Happy to be back. Missed everybody last week, but
We miss
happy
you.
to be back on this episode.
We missed you last episode. So, Eric, now, first question that I always love to ask any guest that we have is, who are you today? Very general question, answered any way you want.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think if you asked me that question straight up, I would say I'm a father of two, and yeah, that would probably be my most defining character, I would say. In fact, both of my kids are currently at Concordia, so.
Oh wow. Okay,
Awesome.
that's pretty cool. How are they
And
surviving online school?
Well, my son's just finishing up, so he got to go in person. My daughter just started, and so she's never really been to Concordia, even though she's going to Concordia. So she's hoping that there's going to be some sort of frosh coming up in September.
yeah, did they have any complaints with the online system? Like, did they ever rant to you about?
Oh,
Um,
she is not a fan. My daughter, sorry, is not a fan of the online exam system, the proctoring system. She doesn't she really was paranoid about the whole thing, to be honest.
She's
thank
not
God,
alone in that regard.
thank God we didn't actually face that proctoring system in the program. We just mainly had essays considered as our finals and just final research projects or any presentations we had. So thank God we sort of avoided that. Yeah. But so you were a former Concordia student, undergrad in urban studies. Uh, we would love to hear your experiences at Concordia. Did you enjoy the program at that time? How students were?
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, funnily enough, I actually started off in mechanical engineering, actually, at
Okay.
Concordia. I did my first year of mech, and I realized that the classes weren't motivating me, and I was like, listen, if I'm not getting motivated by the classes, like, how am I going to see this as a career? So yeah, it was interesting, because then I really didn't know what I wanted to do, so I kind of landed up kind of going as an undefined major for the next year and started taking a whole bunch of courses. What I didn't know is if you do that, they let you register at the very end. So you get to kind of pick up all the classes no one else had taken. So just by complete happenstance, I needed to find another 6 credits in my schedule, and I didn't want something that was completely a dog's breakfast. So I found this intro to urban planning class that sounded like really cool. Registered for it, and yeah, after I kind of finished the class, I said, yeah, that's where I want to go, and so that's how I actually landed up in urban studies. So it was completely by happenstance, thanks to that intro to urban planning class I took.
That's really cool, and we're hearing more and more about it. Like we had one of our profs on a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying the reason I'm in urban planning is I took this class called History of Urbanization, and now he's teaching the class. So it's cool to see how it's always like one moment that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, urban planning is getting better known now, but I would say it wasn't one of those big professions people heard a lot about when I was younger, 25 years ago. So it's great to see that, like, the profile of the profession has actually been increasing. People want to see better, healthier urban places. They want more forms, alternatives to the automobile. So it's no longer just the realm of the traffic engineer and the builder. It's people are wanting places and spaces that are meaningful to them. So it's amazing. And I mean, just in those years as well, you can see how much of Montreal has transformed as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And even from experience, I have a couple of students, couple of friends actually, who weren't certain what they wanted to major in. One was in literature, and she actually the herbs 230 was considered the open elective that all majors would sort of like come in and try that class. And right after that class, she told me, she's like, I want to give this program a chance. And I think that was the one class, since that was everyone's introductory class, that honestly like excited us more for the program, especially being first year, first semester students. So it's pretty awesome to hear that how one class can completely change your perception towards a program, or just lean your interest towards that program. So it's pretty awesome to hear. How how were your cohorts? How were the students around you? Did you was there sort of a personality that you noticed with urban studies slash planning students?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I've always found about people who get into planning, actually, they're big on collaboration, right? I mean, they're
Yep.
interested in cities and interactions and people. So, the cool thing about the program is I'm sure it's still this way, but there's a lot of group assignments, and so you do a lot of interaction with your fellow students. It's not like you just show up in class, you do your course, you do your stuff on your own. So yeah, it had a fun kind of atmosphere, and I mean, back in the day. There's a number of students that I'd worked quite closely with, and we always had a ritual before any sort of big planning presentation. We all go to the Peel Pub and get really cheap recycled beer back in the day, and $1 spaghettis, and yeah, no, it was a fun spirit, and I still think it's a relatively small department. It was a very small department back then, which makes it easy. You kind of very quickly know everyone who's in the department. As I said, you take a lot of classes that other students take, because there's geography classes, there's economic classes you take. So you do mix with other majors, but there's kind of this core cohort that isn't that huge that you get to know relatively quickly. And as I said, in your planning classes, a lot of it's collaborative. So that's always the way I've liked to work is in a team. So it was a great program.
Yeah, and to this day, it's still the thing,
Yeah.
still the scenario. We have our own rituals. It's not the same as going to Peel Pub and getting $1 spaghetti and drinking some beer. One of our traditions is, like, after a presentation, we'll go for drinks, or even before our studio classes, because we had them at like terrible times. We had like massive 3-hour breaks, so we'd end up like walking to Crescent or walking around downtown and getting lunch together before studio. And then we'd have like our rituals of Sunday night studio sessions and being in studio until 10, 11 o'clock at night, ordering pizza up to the studio. So yeah, it's definitely a team environment, and it's so hard to do online.
Yeah, no, I as I said, I feel for the students who are kind of coming in. I mean, hopefully that starting in the fall, people can get more and more interactions. As I said, vaccines are ramping up, and hopefully we can get back to the new normal, whatever that's going to be. Because as you said, same thing with our work environment, makes our work a lot more difficult without being able to kind of see people as much in person and collaborate, because it's a collaborative type profession.
Yeah, and like when you're designing plans and showing maps, it's kind of hard to work on a map online and like share your screen, and then you're pointing your mouse and you're like, where's the mouse? I don't see it.
Definitely.
You spend more time like trying to figure out how to set up the map properly or the plan properly, as opposed to actually working on it.
Oh, yeah.
But on that note, with teamwork, like, what did you like most about the teamwork? Is it the fact that you get to experience different people, and the different people have different backgrounds and different knowledge, and you get to build off your ideas from that?
Yeah, well, very similar. It's what I like when you have different people is you get different perspectives, right? And I mean, a lot about how you see a city is very influenced by your personal history and your perspective. So you're sitting there talking to people of different backgrounds. Often, we had a lot of people who weren't Montrealers, who came from different places, and it really gave you these kind of perspectives that if you're working along, you never actually see the city through those sort of lenses and those eyes. And that really made it quite interesting, is to really understand perspectives. And I'm, being a male as well, we're not as sensitive as it is to certain ways urban space gives really, CEPTED principles and those principles of safety. that are important to women in terms of making sure that they feel comfortable in a lot of spaces. So really, that was the first time that kind of opened my eyes to a lot of that. You know, being a young 20-something male, you never actually really necessarily thought of that. So it really helped out. And then also just having all those cultural references as well from people from around the world that were in our classes. You know, the whole way they interact with cities, is different. I mean, in North America, I mean, we've gotten a lot better, but I mean, it's still a car-centric place, and we're getting more and more human scale. But talking to people who come from places where cities have always been more on a human scale definitely gave a different opinion and viewpoint.
100%. And I love the point you made about how people have different perceptions of the city based on how they've grown up and how they've experienced the city themselves. Because I usually notice, even today with the program, that a lot of people tend to conflict over discussions in class and even during group projects on how to present this type of material, how to look at it this way, look at it that way. And especially between programs such as urban planning and geography, that's where I saw quite a bit of a clash. And don't get me wrong, I love debate. It doesn't have to be as heated as we've seen it, but it just opens your eyes up just to different perspectives. So I think just a message to all the students out there right now is take advantage of your surroundings. Even in Aaron and my experience in the program, we've managed to link up with a good amount of students and create connections that will last a lifetime, hopefully, fingers crossed. So take Eric's advice here. Just enjoy the collaboration part of the program. That's one point that I would want to say regarding Concordia, because I think it offers that very, very well.
So Eric, once you knew that urban planning was what you wanted to do, how did you go about, so you switched to urban studies, and then what led to everything after? Like at the end of, you were nearing your end of your 90 credits, I assume, and you're like, what comes next, and what was going through your head at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was the mid-90s in Montreal, and the early 90s recession was still giving a pretty big hangover. So there wasn't a lot of work out there. Very few employment opportunities. And having a professional designation had definitely some benefits. So I decided I was going to go do my master's in planning. So I applied to a number of schools. I got in at Columbia in New York, as well as McGill. Then by the time I crunched the numbers about Concordia University, I realized that as much as it would be awesome doing my master's in planning in New York City, there's no way I could afford it. So I went to McGill, which has a really awesome program as well in urban planning. It's part of the Faculty of Engineering, which is one of the reasons I applied to McGill, is because they're a lot less kind of urban design focused and a lot more concrete, real example, because it's part of the School of Engineering. So you have a lot of code, a number of staff, actually, the head of transportation planning out there, he's a transportation engineer who is like 51% belonging to the urban planning program and 49% to the civil engineering program. So, it was really well anchored in that piece there. So I did my 2-year master's at McGill, and then there still weren't a whole bunch of jobs around Montreal. So I actually started my career in New York City. As I was going through Concordia, I realized that my real passion, beyond urban planning, was the transportation aspects and around transit. So when I was at McGill, I landed up doing my master's on, at the time, the Ministry of Transportation back in the mid 90s said they were going to stop building metros and they were going to look at LRTs, and that was going to be the future. So I did my thesis all around, the 3 LRT corridors, which were identified at the time, which was Henri Bourassa, Park Avenue, and the South Shore across the Ice Bridge next to the Champlain Bridge at the time. And so I landed up actually doing my thesis on that. And then when I graduated, as I said, nothing around. So I ended up moving down, started my career down in New York. So that's kind of how the next steps kind of went in through my career there.
Awesome.
And that's awesome. And your thesis, what led you to pick those 3? Was it like the MTQ came up to you and like, we need to look into these corridors, or
well, that's it. Those were the 3 corridors the MTQ had launched out back in that day, where they're saying, okay, we're not building metros anymore. We're going to build LRTs, and these are the 3 corridors we think we should choose. And so I kind of took a look to see were the corridors justifiable, what sort of technology was needed. And it was funny because my thesis was done over 25 years ago now, making me feel old. But in fact, back then I looked at the South Shore corridor and I said the problem is you can't use conventional LRT. There's too much demand. You need a form of light metro system along that corridor. In fact, ironically enough, when I came back to Montreal, one of the first projects I did was a justification study on the South Shore again, this time working for the Agence Métropolitaine des Transports, AMT. And again, we concluded a light metro was needed. And we'll fast forward today, and there's light metro trains actually testing on that corridor. So it was fun to see that my conclusion of my thesis was right, and it's actually what's getting built out there. So just goes to show you that sometimes stuff comes up. And as I said, I actually had the pleasure of also analyzing and looking at the Park Avenue corridor as a mandate. I worked on the Montreal Tramway project for the city of Montreal. Never got built, but you can see a whole bunch of the reports on the city's website still. Awesome. So we looked at Park Avenue, we looked at Côte des Neiges, and we concluded Côte des Neiges was actually the corridor that made more sense. And so we designed a LRT loop downtown that went up Côte des Neiges all the way out to the old Blue Bonnets racetrack. As I said, those plans are still officially with the city of Montreal, and they still have it there, but they haven't really been going anywhere. But so as I said, I actually got to touch on a few of the projects I looked at during my thesis, which is always a cool thing.
That's pretty cool. And the fact that you got to work on them professionally too must have been like, I already know it, but I want to add more to what I know and learn more about it and see changes, which is awesome.
No, and as I said, it's we get into our professions really because of the technical passion. And as I said, I've been really fortunate. When I returned to Montreal, one of the students I did my master's with in McGill was working for the firm that's today WSP, and they were looking for a transport planner, and so they'd lost someone who'd moved to New York, actually, funnily enough, and they called me up and said, hey, would you be interested in coming back to Canada and joining this firm? And so at this point, I had 2 young kids, and my wife said, yeah, even though she was American, she said, I'd rather raise the kids up in Canada. So I said, okay. So, I took a job up here, and I was fortunate. I mean, I did a lot of technical work for the next 12 to 13 years, and got to touch a whole bunch of cool projects. As I said, I was I led the P9 BRT project from 2002 to like 2015. That thing took forever. It's under construction finally.
I was actually working on that last summer. I was looking at, because we came up with the new measure of accessibility, which takes into account accessibility across modes, because generally it's like one mode and it's either by car or by public transit, or in some cases like walkability, but we're looking at it across modes. And the case study that we're looking at is when PNUF is implemented, how will accessibility by car and transit increase?
No, it's, and as I said, that was a cool project. When we were called in 2002, and there was a fatality to say, how could we, because it was a counterflow bus lane at the time. So you'd have buses run counterflow to see if we could reopen it. And finally, the conclusion was that was not what should be done, and we should actually take a lane of traffic away and put a BRT, which was at the time a pretty radical idea of removing traffic lanes. Still, the traffic engineer still reigned supreme over at the city of Montreal, and it took 3-4 years until there was some political will to say, you know what, yeah, let's go do it. And then so we won the study to do that, and as I said, I helped develop that out in terms of the project. And then for the South Shore, the REM that's being built, the busway in the middle of the 10, I actually worked on that project. The Ministry of Transportation, we were designing the interchange, and they came to me and they said, well, we've never designed a busway. The ministry was like, so what the heck do we do? And so, we came up with the concept for the busway, and then we then designed it to be easily convertible to LRT, to a light metro system, including the Panama station. We created even a tunnel, which was sealed up for future use. And it's awesome to see that they've reopened that sealed tunnel to give access to this future station. So in fact, all those plans we'd done all those years ago actually are coming to fruition there. And then, as I said, I've had the opportunity in the Montreal region to work on a lot of commuter rail projects, subway extensions, a lot of transit plans, active transportation, highway plans, highway extensions. And then I've also been fortunate enough to work before in the US, but also I've worked since in the US and across Canada, having worked on projects such as the Blue Line extension in Calgary, the Edmonton Metro line, the Waterloo LRT, the Viva BRT. Yeah, I've got to touch a lot of projects, the VQX LRT between Brooklyn and Queens in New York. So yeah, and it's been a fun career of technical work until I got into kind of more senior management, where I still dabble from time to time on projects. In fact, I'm touching a couple projects right now, including a new LRT for Gatineau that would go from Aylmer down into downtown Ottawa.
Oh, awesome.
Sweet.
And when it comes to technical work, what do you count as technical work? Because a lot of students come to me and they're like, I'm not technically oriented. I don't know how to do it. Or I hate GIS. What do I do?
Yeah, any advice for them regarding that?
Any advice for them on that? Yeah, and like,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
software do you mainly use?
I actually went pretty deep into GIS. Of course, now I'm like, those skills are completely useless because of the version. I mean, I actually even taught a GIS class at McGill at the master's level. But to be honest, in my profession, after like the first year, I never touched those tools. To be honest, we had technicians who were specialized in that sort of stuff. So my role generally has always been providing. I've been a project manager generally, so it's
awesome.
Generally either being one of the senior or the leads on most of these projects, where it's really providing the overall vision, orientation, and kind of how you move these projects forward. So, I mean, there's a lot of different roles to play, right? I mean, if you're really into the GIS, the mapping, you can get into that. And the great thing with planning, if you're really into zoning, and the nuances of bylaws and the municipal side, you can get into that. I've always been kind of a master planner, big picture person. So my role has always been coming up with the big ideas. And then I also have a bit of a talent for figuring out how you can squeeze things through. So I have a good kind of vision on kind of cross-sectional elements. So, for the Peanut BRT, we had a real challenge fitting everything into a really constrained right-of-way. So, I'm the one that came up with the right-of-way elements, kind of exactly the cross sections, did the same thing with the Montreal Tramway and with the Waterloo LRT, kind of figuring out, how do you fit these things in real space and not blow the entire city up to do it, is also another area where I've specialized technically is that. But I mean, I've for me, I've always seen the kind of bigger picture of kind of, why do you do a project? What's the reason? Then, okay, once you know what the issue is, what's the right solution for it? And then what's the best way to address it? So I've always kind of been on the bigger picture side of things.
No, I love that. And Eric, I had one question for you. Just curious, and it's a two-part question actually. So in terms of the planning process, what are the main key differences you noticed between working in Canada versus working in the United States? Like, is a process, like I would assume that the process in the United States they're a little bit faster once it comes to their planning process. And that's what I've heard from people in the field now. Would you say that's true? And what are some of the differences you notice between working in the different provinces, such as Quebec versus Ontario?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, the first thing is funny in transportation. I think the U.S. is a hell of a lot slower than us, actually, like painfully.
Okay.
Because they need to, like, what happens in Canada is it's pretty straightforward. The Constitution sets up a separation of powers, and so provinces are fully responsible for things like public transport, highways, roads, right? In the U.S., you've got the city level, the county level, the state level, the federal level, and if you want these big projects to be funded, you've got to get all of those agencies aligned and go through all of their legislation and all of their requirements. And then if it's a big project, Congress has got to vote on it. And it's insane. I mean, you go get a multi-billion-dollar project done in the U.S. It takes a long time, a lot of political wrangling, a lot more than here in Canada. I mean, here in Canada, politics always gets involved in the big projects, but the province kind of runs the show. So if the party in power in the province decides we're going to build this thing, it's gonna happen if they can get it done fast enough. While in the U.S., it's diluted in terms of the process of power out there. So I would say, you know, on the transportation front, I find that the U.S. is definitely, and especially with the gridlock in Congress. I mean, you know, for example, you know, even the bill that went through, you know, one of my best examples is our company's been working on for a long time, putting in a new crossing under the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing got approved by the US government under Obama. They pushed it through as part of the Recovery Act. The governor of New Jersey killed the project because he was a Republican, saying, I'm not going to spend all this taxpayers' money unwisely. New governor comes in New Jersey. They want the project again. This time the Trump administration comes in, kills the project. And now it looks like between the governor and with Biden coming back, we might actually see it come back again. But it actually got to the point they started digging holes and they just stopped everything. I mean, not that that doesn't happen in Canada. I mean, in Ontario, infamously, they started building the Eglinton subway. And then they had the Conservatives come in and they filled in the holes. And we actually, a few years ago, our firm is working on that project, and they had issues when the tunnel boring machines ran into the old works of the old subway as they were building the new subway under Eglinton Avenue. So it's not like it doesn't happen here, but as I said, in the US, you got a lot more political actors at stake. And what I would say is everywhere you're subject to political whims. So here, as I said, if they can get the project going, you have a lot of chance of moving things forward. But you know, I've done a lot of projects that, you know, have got a lot of momentum and then just sit on the shelf. And then, you know, you have to kind of see where they come up. And so, you know, working across Canada is the exact same thing. As I said, I had done a lot of my career here in Montreal, and I always felt that, you know, in Quebec, there was all these issues. But then I went to Ontario, and in the few years I worked there, you know, Rob Ford canceled the LRT program that Toronto had started, and then decided to go all with subways, and then they canceled the subway extension called the Relief Line, turned it into kind of a light metro system, which is now the Ontario Line. So it's really the same thing everywhere. It's all projects are political, and all political is local, and you got to kind of understand those parts of it. And you know, you got to pitch your projects, you got to convince counselors, you got to convince, you know, government agencies, you know, it's the same everywhere, to be honest. It's the layers and the intricacies that are different, but the underlying fundamental issues is, no matter how good your project is if you don't have a strong political champion, your chances of success and having it delivered are pretty low.
And on that note, like, how do you go about dealing with, well, I guess the solution is like to work on multiple projects, but how do you transition from one project to another, especially where you're at completely different stages? And some, what's like at square zero, some it's actually in the phases of being built. So how do you go from constantly transitioning?
Yeah, I mean, some people have a real problem with that. So, I mean, some people really like to be more focused. I always joke, even though I'm a little ADD, but I always love jumping from thing to thing. So, I mean, you know, I would generally, when I was doing full-time, you know, projects, I would have 30 projects on the go at any one time. And, you know, I'd be doing a master plan for transit on one side, I'd be doing a parking study on another, a traffic impact study extending, you know, a highway down to Vermont. I would be doing an LRT study, and they'd all be at different phases. And I always found it just kind of interesting, just different challenges, different viewpoints. But I mean, there's also people who will go into a project and will be in the same project for 5 years. So there's the opportunity for people to kind of go into whatever they wanted. For me, I always just, you know, and not that I'd get bored of things, but I always found it fun to have a different challenge and a different issue and a different problem to have to solve every day. And the fact that they were always on diverging projects, I always found that a fun challenge. So for me, I never found it an issue, but you know, other people like to kind of really be very Cartesian, very systematic. And as I said, there's roles for all sorts of people who kind of want to do that. So that's why I kind of always have been more of the kind of leadership in a lot of these projects, providing the insight. And that really allowed the people who like the technical to dive in and they could do all the technical and I could provide oversight. So that's kind of how people fit their roles in. It's all what they want to do in terms of the profession.
And Eric, did you deal with a lot of stakeholders outside of the company? And if so, how were those interactions? Did you find them challenging? Who was probably one of the toughest type of stakeholders that you had to deal with in your career?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. And yeah, as kind of the PM, I have dealt with every stakeholder you can imagine in multiple jurisdictions, Canada, the US, the Caribbean. And the most difficult is often the public, because projects become very personal, right? I mean, I have dealt with complete, very, very difficult stakeholders that work for different agencies because they just, for some unknown reason, are fundamentally opposed or just decide they want to make your life difficult. And but again, that's an individual, and usually you figure out what their game is, and it takes time, it takes effort, but you can pull it across the line. But for the public, often there is no technical rationale behind it, right? There's no argument or technical exercise you're going to do to convince them. I mean, you're tearing their house down. They're going to be opposed to the project. You're cutting down a tree across the street. You're building, believe it or not, an elementary school next door to their house. And people get very, very passionate about these things. And, dealing with irate public is a challenge, right? Is you have to be understanding, you have to listen, you have to explain. And you have to detach yourself a bit because they will make it personal. They will attack you. They'll ask you, what the hell is as an urban planner and telling us to do with our lives? Like, what sort of shitty education did you get? They'll make it personal. They will most definitely make it personal, and you've got to detach yourself from that. And often these public open houses will go for 4, 5, 6 hours. So you can be literally mobbed by people who are irate and upset. As I said, I've never had much problem with it. As I said, it's not the funnest part of my job, but I'm okay with it. But I actually have colleagues who love that sort of stuff. They love to just sit there and discuss with people and try to have them understand and convince them. So again, this is where different people have different skill sets. So I know a lot of planners who are full-time public engagement specialists. And so all they do is they actually help animate these, because there's a lot of planners that are absolutely terrified of sitting in front of 20 irate people who are yelling at them. And so there are specialists who just do that day long as well to help kind of mediate this. And as I said, I think the most surreal one I ever did was the city of London, Ontario. We designed their BRT system. It was a big network across the whole city that they actually took the local hockey arena. And I mean, this was for a minor league team. So it was like a 15,000 seat hockey arena. And we had like 7,000 people at a public hearing. And you're sitting at center ice, being televised live with, crowds who are stamping and screaming, and who it looked like a Trump rally at times. So yeah, it's a lot of interesting and cool experiences.
That's actually amazing. I didn't expect that. And you know what? Yeah. You know what? I recently read a few case studies on, and I have to agree with you on the public being probably one of the most complicated stakeholders, because a lot of their attachments and sentiments towards their respective area is just mainly like emotional and symbolic, right? When you mentioned the tree, I'm here thinking like these people just probably just loved that tree just because it stood there for God knows how many years. So I can imagine, and there's no there's no technical or rational thinking behind it. It's just personal, symbolic, emotional, right? And when they all get together, I can imagine being probably one of the most complicated.
Yeah, and the biggest issue is often people aren't opposed to the project you're doing, saying, yeah, we need the new school, or yeah, we love the idea of a BRT. Just put it on my neighbor's street. And the problem there is you do it, the neighbors are just going to say, well, just put it on my neighbor's street. So again, this is where, you've got to have, methodologically be sound and really defend your points. And then at the end of the day, the politicians, unfortunately for them, are the ones that have to make the ultimate decision. They're going to have irate people, and they're going to have to decide, is 5,000 upset people in a city of 500,000 enough to derail a project? Or you know what? Yeah, I'm going to listen to the 5,000 people. And I've been at projects where the silent majority get overpassed because of a vocal few. And a lot of the projects I've done, the politicians have had the wherewithal to say, the silent majority should still win. Because the problem is most people who are for a project never really show up. I did have an interesting one where I was extending the Waterloo LRT. So I worked on the first phase, which is now operational. So as an urban planner, if anyone wants to look at have doubts that transit-oriented development exists or not, just go see what happened in Waterloo. I mean, I started that project in 2012. They just announced the job. We just won the owner's engineer, and I was the head of transit planning and also helping kind of finalize the indicative design and the whole traffic, pedestrian accessibility, all stuff that had to do with multimodal planning. I was leading on that job. And as soon as the project was announced, all these developers would start calling us up and ask us well, how long to get to the university campus or to downtown Kitchener? And before the thing was open, the amount of condo towers that built out and spread out along the route was insane. I mean, all these vacant lots had all gotten developed out, and you go look and you'll see all these gleaming business buildings or these old industrial buildings, dating 100 years ago that have been completely transformed into lofts. I mean, if anyone doesn't believe that transit can be a catalyst to urban development, you really got to check out Waterloo. And I mean, Waterloo is an amazing example because it's a metro area of about 700,000 people, and they were bold. They went with light rail. I mean, most cities of 700,000 outside of Europe would never think of giving themselves that sort of infrastructure. And it was great. And so we were looking to extend it down to the city from it serves right now the cities of Waterloo and Kitchener, and it's kind of a 3-city agglomeration, the region. The other one's Cambridge. And so we then I led the planning effort to extend the project down to Cambridge, Ontario. And we were going through this one little old village called Preston. And the people, once again, we were impacting houses, and rightfully so. There's a lot of concerned citizenry. But what happens is all of a sudden, after the first few meetings where they got a lot of negative press, a whole bunch of people who were for the project actually started coming out. So it was great. It was one of the few times I actually saw people realizing, hey, we want LRT. And if we don't actually come up and start saying it, the politicians are only going to hear the negatives. And it worked because, I mean, it got endorsed by council, and we just finished the environmental assessment process. As I said, I left the project a couple of years ago, and my colleagues have finished it up. But I mean, it's now finalized its environmental process, and hopefully, with all of this new transit funding, they'll fund the extension out to Cambridge. But sometimes you do see the pro public come out when there's too much negative press, because there is that silent majority, but often they're overlooked and they don't come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
on that note, what's your favorite part of the planning process? Is it the end when the project is built, or is it these public consultations towards the beginning of the project, or anywhere in between?
Yeah, you know what? My favorite part is doing the ideation for the solution. And so for me, that's what excites the heck out of me is, okay, we need a new bridge, we need a new transit line, so where does it go? How does it work? How do we fit it in? All of those little details of where do you get it in? How do you fit it in? And often, I've been told more than a few times on projects, well, there's no way we're going to get this through here. Finding the solution that actually works. For me, that's where I really enjoy it. And then, of course, then convincing people of it as well is something I enjoy. Is the pitch. At the end of the day, you come up with your great idea, but to be honest, one thing I would advise all planners is make sure you spend some time on public speaking classes, because the greatest idea you have, you got to once again pitch it to politicians, right? And they're not going to understand your technical nuance. And I would say that's something that I've always enjoyed and excelled in, is being able to sit up in front of a city council, sit up in front of a bunch of ministers, and explain to them a project and, you know, convince them that they go spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to build something, is something that I've always enjoyed.
So on top of public speaking classes, what's like one public speaking tip you would give to aspiring planners?
Don't make it too technical, right?
Okay.
Make sure that you relate it that that everyone can understand. Burying ourselves in our technical jargon and our things just kind of detaches people from it. So just really, it's not dumbing it down. It's just making it that people really understand and make it simple. Because I mean, even a complicated project, I'll take transportation. I'm moving someone from A to B, right? How are we doing that? Why are we doing that? What are the benefits? You know, really keep it to the headlines. Think more that you're a bit of a spin doctor. I mean, you're keeping to facts, but you really want to spin those key facts. And that's what's really important in these projects is the sound bites. Because if you just kind of stay to the technical and the headlines they get is that this is going to be $800 million, you know, that's not the fact you want them to understand. You want them to understand that this will save you from having to do 14 road widenings. This will, you know, remove X hundred tons of greenhouse gas emissions. This will save this many lives a year. This could lead into this much urban development. You know, those are the things you want them to walk away with. Not that I'm building a train, right? The train is a means to an end, but there's all these other benefits. And so I think often we get so wrapped up in the product, we forget the reason.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
And that's a good point. And I know a lot of our peers are like very against presentations and even communicating to the public. Like I've had instances where we were doing a charrette and my teammates did not want to speak. So I was up there presenting our whole team's ideas and nobody else spoke. And then I stood up there and the public, or our teacher in this case, grilled us for a half hour. And my partner slowly stood up with me and they're like, okay, we'll show that we're supporting you. But it was not the easiest, but it's always like enjoyable, I find, as well, when you're presenting it and hearing the public's opinion and getting their input and educating it to them in a way where they make sense of why it's happening as opposed to what's actually being done.
Yeah, and again, as I said, it's not for everyone, right? So there's tons of planning jobs where you don't have to do that, but there's a lot that you do. And so, you know, I think it's a great skill set to develop out there
100%.
and spend some effort on it.
Yeah, essentially communicating ideas and executing it well towards the public or towards politicians. And even I notice, going on to Aaron's point, that I feel like a lot of people in general did not even enjoy doing presentations even before COVID and before this online system. But now it's even gotten worse because a lot of people are just behind with their camera turned off completely. They're not even turning on their cameras during presentations. So, and I was in Aaron's position at one point very recently where my teammates were all had like their cameras off and I was the only one speaking. And it's gotten to the point where professors are also like, we're just used to seeing a bunch of black screens now. And it's sort of become the sad reality. Hopefully we don't have to deal with this system in the near future, in the new normal.
Yeah, well, the one thing I would say though is, as I said, planning, regardless of what you do, is a collaborative process. So you have to have a level of comfort of working together. And I mean, you know, for any sort of planner, I think that's kind of table stakes, to be honest.
And I actually had another question in mind. Now, let's say you're dealing with your coworkers or other stakeholders who are not sort of up to date with, like, let's say, with the information that's presented to them. Now, would it be your responsibility as the expert to sort of guide them and like present the information to them, or would it be their responsibility to do their own research and stuff? Like, what type of expectation would future planners have? Like, would it be, I would assume that it's very important to try your best on your end to make sure you're fully updated. You have the knowledge, you've done your research before coming into a meeting, before having a session, right? Have you dealt with any coworkers or stakeholders that just are not on the same page at all times, and how do you counter that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, often a lot of our clients land up, you know, if they work for smaller municipalities Or, for example, I talked about the Waterloo LRT and the London BRT. They've never built rapid transit, so they don't have anyone that's an expert in it. So a lot of what you do sometimes as a professional is you educate your client, and client education is a very important piece of it. And don't assume that they're going to know, going to be what I would call an educated client or a savvy client. So part of your role is to actually train. And I mean, the same thing when you come out of school, you need mentorship. I mean, there's an expectation you're going to go out there and you're going to do research and you're going to do, but there's stuff you learn from a book, but then there's also how do you apply it in reality, right? And
Definitely.
And so, the nice thing with planning, since it is collaborative, I've always adored kind of mentoring and framing up, the next generation of planners. But I mean, obviously, you got to go out there and keep your ear to the ground, keep reading a lot about what's going on, and kind of dive in. There's a lot of great resources. So, it's both pieces. Part of it is you got to kind of dive into it, but also in the industry, the reason there are senior people, they're there to provide you mentorship, guidance, and explain to you kind of how to go through it as well. So it's a bit of a mix, but I would say, on the other side, working with your clients, just because your client hired you, I mean, honestly, often they've hired you because they actually don't know what to do. So you've also got to see your role as not only delivering a product, but actually helping educate your client throughout it as well.
And that's awesome to hear, because I've always been somebody who's been passionate by teaching. And more as I'm in planning, I'm like, I could teach through planning. And that's one of my favorite things about it.
No, and that's kind of the great thing with the profession is even if you're not formally teaching, you're actually as you become more senior in your career, you're going to be teaching all the time, and also, I mean, the ability to be able to once again take those concepts and verbalize them simply helps all the stakeholders at the end of the day, including the politicians, the public, because you've got to teach them a bit about what we do for them to actually understand why we're doing it.
And one thing that I can definitely say on our experiences is whenever we've been involved in team projects or projects outside of class, I think the most important thing with having teammates who are, let's say, not as knowledgeable or who are not sort of up to date, I think it's, as a leader in a leadership role, it is your responsibility to make sure they focus on their strengths as opposed to pointing out their weaknesses in order just to have a successful execution, right? Because I feel like, and a lot of students go through this, and it's very normal that you're sometimes unhappy with the way your teammates perform or sort of present or how they research and what type of information they're obtaining. And I think the biggest thing is just as a leader just guiding them and just making sure that they're on the right path. And I think patience is the key word here.
Yeah, no, patience is key. And I mean, I recently, one of my most recent roles, I was leading, a team of 2,000 professionals.
Ooh.
And a big piece of it is you got to play to people's strengths. You got to challenge them too, because at the end of the day, people have to grow, but you've also got to play to people's strengths. And because for a team to succeed, everyone has a role to play, and you've got to understand where people's strengths are, play to their strengths, and support them where they have more weaknesses. And as I said, one of the things, if you go into private practice, it's different in the public, because the public, you can get a little more pigeonholed. But in private practice, you need to be good at the technical, you need to be good at client management, you got to be good at following budgets and finances, you need to be good at organizing teams, you need to be good at reporting internally. So there's a lot of balls in the air, and no one tends to have everything. So what you have to realize is in your team is like, okay, this person's really good at being able to follow up with the budget aspect. So even if they're not the lead person, you can put them in charge of that aspect. And so what you try to do is put a team together that can fill all of the holes that you need, and that they can work together as a single unit. And obviously you want to build everyone up as they go and improve them. But some people just don't have a natural passion for certain elements. And it's just in human nature. I mean, like, if we were all excellent at everything, then, no one would specialize. And that's just not the way the world works. So as you said, part of it is knowing people's strengths and playing to them, while always offering them a bit of a challenge. But I mean, that's what you need for people leadership.
Definitely.
That's awesome.
And do you have any advice for future grad students or those who are going to be attending grad school?
Well, I don't know if it's for grad students or all students. My biggest piece of
Yeah.
advice is lean out there, say yes, and try new things. As I said, I think the thing that's helped me the most in my career is on more than a few occasions, people have walked in and asked, "Have you ever done this before?" I'm like, "No," and they're like, well, "We need someone to do it." I'm like, "Oh yeah, fine, I'll do it."
Okay, cool.
And I think that's what's helped me advance in the most of my career. As I said, I still touch some technical now, but I mean, um, I've been a senior executive with the firm for a number of years, vice president or higher positions. And the way I kind of got there was really just taking on completely different challenges. I think probably one of the most memorable ones, and I mean, you got to have the opportunity. I was super lucky that opportunities arose. I mean, with WSP, when I started, we were a 400 person Quebec only firm. And we've grown now to be over 50,000 people around the world. So, I mean, I was lucky. I kind of chose a firm that grew with me. But I remember one day, and this was a long time ago. This was back when 2006. We had just started working internationally, and we were in Trinidad and Tobago, and we were going to pursue this $1 billion rail project, and they needed someone to PM it, and like no one wanted to touch it. And as I said, we were still mostly a Quebec-based firm, so fewer people spoke English, and no one really wanted to go in and try to lead a $1 billion bid with the world's largest companies to go chase a rail project. And they were just like, "You want to do it?" And I was just like, "I don't have no idea what I'm going to do, but sure, let's dive in." And I was sitting in meetings, and we were with some of the world's largest firms, Bombardier and everything else, and here I am, a fresh new face, and you got all these guys who are 40, 50, 60 years of experience. But, they saw that I had the get up and go. They mentored me. They taught me how to
That's
do it.
awesome.
As I said, I was doing a role that I was, for all intents and purposes, should have had 25 more years experience under my belt to do. But, they gave the opportunity and let you step up. And that, and so, in fact, a lot of senior leaders that I've had, a lot of very senior vice presidents have been pretty young, because you realize that there's people who are, if they're willing to step up, you got to get them the chance. They might not always succeed, but it's if they've got the will. So I would say, within your comfort zone, like, and even a little outside of your comfort zone, actually, like, put your hand up. I mean, don't put your hand up if you really think there's no way you're going to achieve it. But if you think there's any way you can beg, borrow, or steal to get to the result, do it. Because you'll be amazed on the amazing different experiences you'll have in your career. And as I said, those 2 years bidding that job in Trinidad and Tobago was quite a surreal experience, where I actually got to travel to a whole bunch of places around the world, having meetings at high levels, exposing me to the type of decision making that I would have never gotten exposed to otherwise.
Awesome. So essentially be comfortable with getting out of your comfort zone.
That's
something
it. Yeah.
that over time. Okay, that's awesome advice.
Yeah, and just say, just go, just say yes, do it, and
okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna sugar wash it, whitewash it. Sometimes it means you're doing 70 hours a week, but I mean, that often is where I found the biggest passion. It's not for everyone, but I'm like, if you really want to go out there and experience everything you can, that's my big piece of advice.
That's awesome. Thank you. And as two students who are going to grad school in the future, I think it's great to hear.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I would say out there today, we're going to be in front of a massive manpower crunch coming up in this industry, especially in the transportation space. Both in civil engineering and transportation planning, there is more work than there are people today, and the baby boomers are all starting to retire. So we're gonna be faced as an industry with a real lack of personnel. So as I said, I think for all of those that are in school now and going to grad school, there's going to be lots of cool opportunities for them in their career, because there's going to be a lot of generations that are going to be retiring out, and that's going to leave a lot of opportunities and openings. And the other thing is, a lot of our infrastructure was built just after World War II, and they've stamped a 50-year expiry date on it, and we've hit that expiry date today. And so there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be renewed, and there's that whole shift to new projects. And we've got to get to net zero in the world. At the end of the day, I think everyone's realized that regardless of what the Trump administration said, global warming is a real thing and it's a real crisis. So there is going to be huge opportunity, and so I would say, regardless of where you want to go in this space, and there'll be many cool years ahead.
That's awesome to hear.
Awesome.
And Eric, thanks a ton for all the advice and all the information you gave us. Any last words for the students, for us?
Yeah, no, just I think the biggest piece of advice I always said is the reason I went into planning is I found it was a passion, and all the stuff I've done in my career, I've as I said, if I stop having fun at doing something, it's the day I'm going to change either my job, my role, or whatever else. Do what you find is drives you, and that if you do that, I think everyone will be successful.
Great, Eric.
Awesome.
Thanks a ton for coming on the platform today. We appreciate your time. I know a lot of students will enjoy watching this, and a lot of students do enjoy it whenever we do have a guest speaker, as opposed to us speaking about random development projects or just random thoughts that are going basically through our mind. So it's always great to have a third person here and just speak on their experiences, because this is truly what students are really looking for. They want to know what's out there. And I feel like, they didn't have the opportunity to hear people speak, especially being in person, right? Like they didn't get professionals like coming in. Not everyone had exposure to that. I know all the planning students had good exposure to that, but the urban studies students didn't really get to see that side. So I'm happy you were able to come here. We thank you so much for being our guest of honor. And yeah.
Well,
thank you very much for the opportunity.
If you ever want me back to talk about any specific topics, because I talk kind of more career development, but if there's ever questions around transport planning or anything else, more than happy to come back. As I said, it was a lot of fun chatting with you guys, and hopefully some of your classmates find this useful, and it was a lot of fun.
No, thanks a ton, Eric, and we definitely want you on another episode soon towards the end of the semester, especially speaking about career development. I think a lot of students would like that and we could completely give you the floor to speak and present that.
Awesome. No, looking forward to it. And again, thanks a lot, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Stay in contact. Thank you so much, sir.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Eric.